I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to Conversations with Al McFarlane. That song is always breathtaking. We play that kudos to our own Minnesota's own Sounds of Blackness to Gary Hines, McAllister College graduate and artist and entrepreneur, genius, exceptional here. And that music, I think, grabs the tenor of our times. And it's particularly important to lead into the kinds of difficult but necessary conversations we're having as a community and as a nation. Wednesdays, we focus on economic development, on job creation, on wealth building. And I'm pleased to continue in that vein today. Thanking all of you for joining us on YouTube, on Facebook. If you like this conversation on YouTube, subscribe to the channel and let people know that you're with us and uh, be a part of this. Like us and share this to your networks on Facebook. Again, thank you so much for being part of the conversation. So my friend Mike Tamali is here, and Mike is the president, founder and president, maybe that title has changed, of the Neighborhood Development Center, which is headquartered here in Twin Cities, Minneapolis and St. Paul, and in partnership with a lot of community groups. The NDC, Neighborhood Development Center, has trained 4,500 low income entrepreneurs since 1993. And they do this through a 20-week course. Some 500 of that graduates of the training program are in business today, with 82% of those business owners being persons of color. And the organization is a CDFI. I think that stands for Community Development Financial Institution. Michael, correct me if I'm wrong.
That's right.
CDFI. And it's also SBA and a REBA-free lender. I have to admit, I don't know what that means. Mike's going to fill me in a minute on that. But the organization focuses on startup and growing inner city businesses and provides hours and hours of business assistance annually. It's a developer and manager and co-owner of 6 business incubators, including the uh, Midtown Global Market, historic, the Mercado Central over on Lake Street, and Frogtown Square. And NDC also leads the Build from Within Alliance, which is a coalition of 9 organizations that lead comprehensive micro enterprise development programs targeting low income entrepreneurs of color in communities of concentrated poverty in cities like Anchorage, Detroit, Philadelphia, St. Cloud, Syracuse, New York, Wilmington, and of course here in Twin Cities. Mike, my friend, good to see you. Thank you for joining the program. Thank you for all the work that you do. How are you?
Thank you, Al. I'm great. It's great to be with you. You and I go back a really long way. I was in your back room just now reminiscing about conversations with Al McFarlane, not just at Global Market, but at Lucille's Kitchen.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
and That's dating us a little bit, I guess. But I sure appreciate being on, Al. I really want to commend you for all the incredible impact you've had on our community for many, many years and continue to have. We all look up to you as an amazing leader and icon in this community. So thank you for all that. If I can also just mention Sounds of Blackness, that's an incredibly powerful piece that you started with. And I just have to just shout out a little bit to our fellow McAllister alumni, since I graduated from there back when the earth was young as well. But that was an amazing kickoff, because this moment right now is incredibly intense, obviously, including the news this morning about the police officers, what they had done a few weeks prior to George Floyd's death. it's just unbelievable what continues to surface. And I guess in some tragic way, thank God it is surfacing. And it's honestly our job, all of us, to keep it front and center above the surface and deal with it, get real about it. So thank you for having me on.
Well, thank you. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. Good to see you. Thank you. I tell people that I've been a client of yours and have been enriched and enhanced as an entrepreneur by the service your team has provided to my company, McFarlane Media. So I know I'm in the company of a lot of other business owners and entrepreneurs that really appreciate and value both the vision and the results that your team helps entrepreneurs envision and achieve. So thank you on behalf of myself and all of those other entrepreneurs that you've served as well. Let's talk generally about the proposition. I've asked you this before, but I never get tired of hearing you talk about it. Where the idea, where the seed for NDC developed. So let's give NDC 101. Talk about the background, the genesis, and the approach to that is Mike Temal's personal story. I think that makes all the difference in the world.
All right, I'll do that in one hot second. And just if I may, I want to mention one little thing from your introduction, which is that I'm no longer president of Neighbor Development Center. I am still founder, CEO, and official old guy. But Renee Dossman is the president of Neighbor Development Center, really as of a year ago. I mean, officially as of last summer, but she's been running all of our Twin Cities operations since a year ago. She's an absolutely phenomenal leader. Grew up half in, and she'll tell you her story. I think you're going to have her on here fairly soon, but half of her childhood was in Cabrini Green in Chicago, and the other half was in Duluth, Minnesota, if you can believe that. So anyway, this woman is an unbelievable leader and force of nature, and I'm just so grateful that she's come into our organization to take over the helm. And so, yes, I am focusing now on our national work primarily, but also Chicago and Lake rebuilding and the global market survival. But now to your question, and I apologize for that little digression, Al. But
and I knew that she was there. I knew she was going to be on. But that's why I said, reading an old resume, that you would correct me in a minute. So thank you. You did what I expected you to do. Thank you.
Well, so to just keep it real brief here, I'm the son of immigrants. I grew up on the east side of St. Paul, but with a pretty different background than the average, if I may say, the average white guy from the east side of St. Paul. Although I'm very proud of being an East Sider in many ways. But my parents were immigrants. My father was from the former Yugoslavia. He had been in the underground in World War II in the mountains fighting the Nazis and the communists, and lost, and was also he was captured and was a prisoner of the Gestapo for 18 months, which is not fun, obviously. And he ended up in a POW camp, Stalag 17A, up in Germany, where they had shipped him, and was liberated by the U.S. 7th Army, General Patton, in 1945, and then couldn't return home to his old country of Yugoslavia because he had also fought against Tito and the communists. So he was stuck for 5 years, displaced person without a home, etc., or without a nationality, I guess, or a country. My mother was a Danish social worker from Copenhagen who had come into that camp to work with the orphan kids, and there were thousands of displaced kids that really didn't know where they go next. So anyway, they immigrated to they got married over there, got immigrated in right around the end of 1950. Ended up in Youngstown, Ohio, working in a steel mill. My father had been an attorney in the old country, spoke 8 languages. But didn't know English, and he planned to go back home and overthrow the communists. That didn't work out. So after a couple of years of working in a Stanley Works steel mill in Youngstown, somehow or other got a job running a gym in a settlement house in Louisville, Kentucky, called Market Street Neighborhood House. It was on the racial dividing line, because this would have been 1953, maybe even 1952. So it was still legal segregation in Louisville, and that was the dividing line, and the settlement house was on the white side of that street. And so on day one of his job, he invited the kids from the other side of the street to come over. And that included one kid that you all became familiar with, Cassius Clay, the Louisville Lip, who hung out in that gym for the 4 years that we lived there, and that my dad ran the gym, and my dad had a few stories of the young Cassius. And in fact, that story was presented. I was invited to send a letter to Muhammad Ali right about maybe 8 years ago now, 10 years ago. They were building the Muhammad Ali Center. I was even invited to come down and meet him because he remembered my dad, and you know, I was a baby, right? So, but anyways, and we lived under the attic of the settlement house. And I didn't see that invitation until 6 months later because it got buried in a pile of mail here in my house. So that was something I'll always regret. But anyway, so in 56 or 57, my dad was admitted to the University of Minnesota social work program. We was placed at a neighborhood house on the west side of St. Paul. So we lived under the attic of that settlement house down in the flats, in the old west side flats, until that neighborhood was destroyed by the St. Paul Port Authority, allegedly because it flooded once in a while. But as soon as they cleared out mostly Latinos at that point from their neighborhood, they put up a flood wall and said, "Damn, like let's build a industrial park over here," which is what they did. So you know, Rondo wasn't the only community destroyed by such prevalent urban removal practices in the 50s and the 60s. The West Side Flats was another one here in our city. So we moved up to the East Side, and you know, my dad ended up starting as the executive director eventually of St. Paul Big Brother program, and my mother became a school social worker on the East Side of St. Paul Public Schools. So I graduated from Harding High School, spent a couple of years running around like everybody at a young age, and ended up as a Vista volunteer out in Los Angeles, San Bernardino actually, and filed what I believe to be the first in the nation branch challenge under the Community Reinvestment Act in 1978, and also sort of helped lead a rent control movement in San Bernardino, and ended up coming back to go to the Humphrey Institute, and eventually got and worked for the Humphrey Institute for like 3 years on staff under something called the Cooperative Community Development Program, where we took on Control Data's City Venture Corporation. I don't know if you wanted all this, Al. Sorry.
No, perfect. Love it, man. This is exactly what I wanted. Yeah.
Some of you old timers might remember the whole City Venture Corporation story and Control Data, but if you didn't, look it up and it'll blow your mind. So that's what I worked on for about 3 years with Calvin Bradford, and got to spend good time with Gail Sincata down in Chicago. Went on NPA, National People's Action, did a series of hits called Reclaim America back in 1982. From hits to banks in Chicago, took over a riding club in Cleveland in order to introduce ourselves to the CEO of Sohio Gas, who had been shutting people's gas off.
You say you took over a club. What do you mean by that?
Well, like 8 busloads of people showed up.
Oh, you took it over.
Well, we were just sort of poured out, and the folks were sitting up on some veranda with their little black helmets on. I'd never even heard of a riding club, but I found out. Yeah, so their eyes got big, and they didn't finish their dessert. But anyways, but the guy was there. So anyway, you know, this is Gail Sincata, National People's Action. You know, this is good old fashioned community organizing. And I was not trained as an organizer, but I was certainly around a lot of that and have immense respect for that. We actually went all the way to New York City and tried to shut down the New York Stock Exchange, but they saw us coming. So we went. It was called Wall to Wall on Wall Street was our little march, and you know, a couple thousand people. And but anyways, so again, Gail Sincata, the you know, good old community organizing, Saul Alinsky out of Chicago, the Gamaliel Institute and, Barack Obama's background. All those things are things I have some knowledge of, a little bit of history with. I was not a trained organizer, but immense respect for those values and that practice of involving the folks front and center in deciding their own issues and determining a course of action and leading that action, right? So, and a good organizer stands in the back of the room and lets it go. So anyway, fast forward to the founding of Neighbor Development Center. I had run a neighborhood CDC on Rice Street in St. Paul for 6 years, from 84 to 90, called North End Area Revitalization. And that had been launched by the neighborhood group, which was District 6 Planning Council in the North End, led by a great organizer named Sharon Voida, and the North End Business Club, led by Denny Perkle. So as the businesses and the neighborhood had gotten together, launched this effort to try to pump some life into Rice Street, which had a 40% rate of vacancy. If you basically think of Rice Street running from University Avenue in the state capitol up to at least Maryland Avenue, maybe a little further north up to Arlington, say, there was 40% of those buildings were boarded up.
Okay.
And so my job, they hired me to sort of be the staff guy. We ended up doing about 80 or 90 storefront improvements. Got into some lending to these businesses, did a lot of marketing. We built a new little mall at Rice and Front, all of which was designed not just to help little businesses, but to really permeate out to the neighborhood. That commercial corridor had all the traffic, had the most traffic in the neighborhood, 17,000 cars a day. And so what people perceived as they drove on Rice Street was what they thought of as for the whole neighborhood. Okay. And so this was really a strategy of leverage, a strategy of, put your drop in the bucket where people can see it, start thinking different about their own community and about their own family, their own future options in their lives. And that led then eventually to me in 1990 getting hired by Western Bank and Bill Sands to try to figure out what to do around University and Dale, which had been plagued for probably 25, 30 years by pornography and strip joints and all the associated ills that come with that. And I'll just say one last little part of the early story, which is that there were some other groups on Selby Avenue, up on Central Avenue, Northeast Minneapolis, down on back then was Concord Street, now is Chavez, who were trying to copy what we had done up on Rice Street. And so I had a lot of these connections and was working with them on that regard. But it was the group on Selby. It was Merle Harris, Nick Davis, and Randy Treichel. There was like 3 or 4 of them that had been trying to figure out what to do about Selby Avenue. I mean, Selby and Dale just sort of persisted in the minds of old timers, and like this was a rough place and blah blah blah. And in the meantime, gentrification had started down by the St. Paul Cathedral and was moving west along Selby, but it certainly wasn't by or for the indigenous population, which was primarily African American and low income. And so I worked with Nick and Merle and Randy to help form what became Selby Area Community Development Corporation. And so, and then Greg Finzel, who's still over there running Rondo Community Land Trust, he was the district council organizer at that time, at District 8. And they did a study with the University of Minnesota, surveying the residents of Summit University neighborhood about quite a variety of issues. But 2 of the questions they asked was, do you run a little business out of your home? And 11% of the respondents said yes. And the other question was, would you like to bring it out to the avenue, and would you need help to do that? And most of them said yes, we would. And so here you had a new CDC that I'd been involved helping with Nick and Merle and everybody with all these vacancies up and down Selby Avenue, but the notion of trying to bring in outside businesses to fill those, number one, didn't feel right, and number two, probably wouldn't have worked, right? But here we had this study that District 8 Planning Council had done. It's called the SNAP Survey, Summit University Needs Assessment Project, 1988. I still have the little booklet. And it just lit a light bulb for the district council and Merle and Nick and everybody and myself, saying, hey, we don't have to go outside this community to find entrepreneurs to fill these spaces. Let's find those 11% who said yes, and let's figure out how to help them elevate their business idea, their dream, and bring it out to the avenue. And that's what we did. And we did it starting with their organization. Because the challenge was, how do you reach that 11%? How do you even find out who they are? And they're not going to trust me. They're certainly not going to trust, the city or the banks or the university or anything else, but they would trust, Nick and Merle and Selby Area CDC, and they would trust Greg and District 8 Planning Council, right? And other community-based groups.
Right.
So we said, look, why don't you do some outreach, and if you can get enough of them, we'll bring in a trainer and run a training class, right in your office. And we did the very same identical thing at the very same time with Ron Pauline over at Aurora St. Anthony Black Clubs on University Avenue. So we started 2 classes right out of Jump Street, 1993, to write a business plan for your own business idea. Big Daddy's Barbecue attended the one over at Aurora St. Anthony. Sharon Noel with West Indies Soul attended that class.
Yep.
We had people, people came out and took that class. They were comfortable because it was in their own community with their own neighbors, right? So then they all graduate and they stand up in front of the group, and they have their family around, and they have their little certificate, and everybody's happy. In fact, I'll never forget, one of them had been a janitor somewheres, and he said, I'm tired of pushing the broom. Now I'm going to own the broom. And he and his wife ran that. They started a office cleaning business, L&L Cleaner, Larry and Linda Liggins. And they ran that company for probably 15, 20 years, raised 3 daughters in it. Every night, the whole family was cleaning offices. And then the daughters have come back since then and taken our class, Al.
Okay.
But anyway, so at that point, they want money, right? So they're like, we got the plan. No one's going to give us any money, Mike. So we went to Minneapolis Foundation and got a loan fund and started making loans. And then once you make the loans to folks, number one, you want them to succeed so they succeed. And number two, you want them to succeed so they pay you back. And so that's where technical assistance came from. And finally, you want them to open their business on Selby Avenue or on University Avenue or on Rice Street or wherever it is. So that's we call these the 4 pillars of our program: entrepreneur training out in the community for writing a business plan, then the financing, which is character-based, because all the other C's of lending usually aren't real strong. And then technical assistance, one-on-one technical assistance, whether it's legal or accounting or marketing or restaurant management or whatever it is, free of charge mostly, and ongoing as needed. And then finally, real estate. These are the 4 pillars of our model, which is unique nationally, and it's based both on my experience running a neighborhood CDC and on international microfinance lessons, but also community organizing, right? So the values that permeate through all this is folks have the talent, folks are the asset in these neighborhoods, and they've just been denied the door to go through to develop their own skill into a sustaining business. So there you go. That wasn't the nickel tour, Al. That was I gave you the whole 9 yards. Sorry.
I call that a master class already.
There you
know, what's so important, Mike, is that stories like this get told. That's what my job is. I'm a storyteller, a documenter, an archivist, right? And so I feel like having this conversation with you is exactly my personal and business mission, to listen and let you and encourage you and invite you to reflect and tell what happened, right? How it happened and what the players were and what the barriers were and how people and communities overcame and how all of that fits in where we are today. Because as you said at the beginning, we certainly are in a very, very interesting time. And so, having received that background, I want to just jump right into a tough discussion on where we are right now. And the two things I want you to focus on, if you would, three. One is how all business and businesses in our communities in particular are faring and suffering, and hopefully uh, being able to navigate through the impact of COVID-19. That's number one, because our businesses and our communities are communities are ambivalent, but more affected by infection, by hospitalizations, and by deaths. That's number one. And so more at risk, but also have an ambivalent attitude about the medical establishment and the government. And so we're hesitant. That's one. How does that affect our businesses? It affected mine because, Insight, we delivered our paper every week to some 400 small businesses and neighborhood businesses and churches and libraries. And guess what? One weekend, everything shuts down. Where are you going to put the paper? Nowhere to put it because all those businesses are shut. And so the businesses that are open, you get them and invite them to, let you leave more papers, but you don't have the same distribution stream that you had before because of the shock to the system of the order to shut down. So that's one. What we did is we pivoted and shifted our distribution, 50% of it, to door residential delivery. And that's one of the ways that we responded. But I'm curious as to how other businesses you've worked with have been able to respond to the crisis caused by COVID-19. Number one. Number two, then you get George Floyd, right? And the impact in St. Paul in particular and Lake Street, two areas where you're vested heavily. What happened to those businesses? What was their experience? And what have they been able to do? What have you been able to do with them as a partner and mentor and a resource to help them come back? And what's the status of that? So those are the two big questions. Third question, you brought it up, is what can we expect in terms of volatility in our communities coming up as early as next month when the Derek Chauvin trial in the murder of George Floyd takes place in March. So a lot of stuff. So go at that. Just what are your thoughts?
Conversations with Al are always interesting. And again, first of all, immensely grateful that you've been doing this for so long, and every time and every one you do is very critical and very timely. And obviously, right now the time is more critical. It seems like than or more ripe with opportunity. I hope, and certainly anger and rethinking. I hope than usual. But so to go through your three questions. First of all, in terms of COVID. And the business we work with, which, as you said earlier, about 500, mostly about 90% are BIPOC owned. They're mostly smallish, right? So they've got usually anywhere from, on average, they have about 5 or 6 employees. I'm going to start with mental health because the stress on any business owner is not well known, except if you are a business owner. And if you're an employee, you like to, you work hard, you get your paycheck, you go home and you turn on the ball game or whatever you do. And if you're a business owner, you go home and open the QuickBooks or open the, how you gonna pay the bills kind of thing. And that's always the case, especially with these real small businesses, and especially because the entrepreneur has to do it all. And so if you put on top, and so we all know how close to the bone most of them operate, not by any choice, but just because that's how tight most little businesses are. financially. And then you put COVID on top of that, and it depends on the business, right? So there's some businesses that haven't been affected as much as others, and there's some businesses that have been just flat out shut down. So there's quite a spectrum there. And I will say that the ultimate strength that we're working with is the entrepreneurial spirit with and tenacity, persistence, just strength of character of these folks. You don't get into business without all of that, without being focused, without being stubborn, and without being nimble. And so just like you guys went from 400 drop-off sites to door, that's, you're saying a lot in a half a sentence right there, Al. And if anybody sat and thought about, what does that really mean? That's a whole different ball game, what you had to do, and you also hoped it worked, right? So you don't really know. You're trying to convince advertisers that it's not only as good, but maybe better and whatever. And that's true for every little business. So one of the things we've done is called a mindset reset set of services, where we try to just get real out there about and open about mental health for these entrepreneurs, and provide places for where we can connect them, particularly with BIPOC professional service providers, and try to take away the stigma, take away the embarrassment or the shame or whatever people may have grown up taught about mental health. But I mean, if you're not stressed right now and anxious as a business owner, you're pretty exceptional and pretty lucky, and that has health implications, as well as judgment implications. So putting that on the front burner, being open about that, having a package of set of services for that is critical. And I also know one of our major partners, Cultural Wellness Center, has been doing that type of work in the African American community for years. And I just want to give a shout out to them for doing that and being a real leader in that issue. In terms of other pivoting, every business has had to, or most businesses have had to figure out how to do online sales, because customers aren't coming out. The Midtown Global Market customer accounts are maybe 30% of what they were prior to COVID. And as you just said, that happened like overnight, right? So if they're not online, if they're not able to sort of generate and take in online orders, as well as deliver them somehow, whether curbside or to the door, they have nothing going on. And so it turned out, like in the global market, about half of the business didn't even have a website. So Shahir Ahmed, who is a South Sider now, but I think grew up on the North Side. Shahir leads our business lab, or Biz Lab, we call it. And his team put together a thing called a Tech Pack, where they have provided free of charge to 100 entrepreneurs three things. One is a new built out website. Second is social media to drive customers. And third is a POS system, a point of sales system, so they can actually take credit card sales and so on. And then obviously also working with them on how are you going to get the product to the customer. So that Tech Pack is another response we've had. And, different entrepreneurs do different things to try to reach their customers. I know Fam's Deli inside Global Market, Trong, in their farm, he starts biking around with doing door-to-door deliveries. And let's put it this way: if the entrepreneurs themselves aren't really breaking a major sweat right now to cut costs, but also to pivot and come up with new ways to reach the customer and pay bills, we don't honestly break a sweat on our end to help them. But presuming that they are, and most of them certainly do that, there are a few other things we've done, Al. We've at the global market, we cut everybody's rent in half effective March 1st last spring, and they're still cut in half, and they'll be likely cut at 50% through June at the cost of $1 million to our budget. But that's not enough to keep them going, nor is the the tech pack that I just mentioned, or the mindset reset. Another thing, we've been doing a huge number of marketing events. There's a young woman named Destiny. I'm sorry, I don't know her last name, but she put on the Black Flea Market at the Global Market maybe 2 months ago and did fantastic over the past 2 weekends. And coming up now again on the next couple of Saturdays, Soul to Soul Barbecue has got lines that, we've been advertising for the best barbecue I've ever had in my mouth. And those are, the line took me 50 minutes and I didn't regret it a bit once I had my first bite. So there's constantly, or there's like a chili cook-off or a soup cook-off, whatever. We're doing a lot of marketing in there to try to drive customers. But we're also literally, we've raised money to do some income replacement, is kind of my new way of talking about it, rather than a subsidy or grant or cash or anything else. But we're doing, so we've been for 6 months now. We're going to be able to literally hand the businesses inside the Global Market some love in the form of straight up money, because it doesn't really matter how low your rent is if nobody's coming in the door, right? And no one's coming in the door when the governor shuts you down or when customers don't come. So we're doing a lot also over in St. Paul. And grants became a thing that were never a thing before, right? So all of a sudden now, I think the world has finally woken up. It's not all just about loans. Try to give a loan to a business that's hanging on by a thread, and all that does is drag them, put more weight on that thread. And so finally, funders and the government and groups like ours have been able to not only talk about it but do it. And so we put out 650 loans or grants in the last 9 months. Prior to that, our typical year, we did about 50 loans a year. We did 650 of them in 2020. Most of that wasn't our own money. We were fronting for the SBA, for deed, for city of Minneapolis and St. Paul and Hennepin County, Ramsey County, et cetera. But we were processing that. We were reaching deep into these communities of color and these micro businesses so that they had access. Same with like the PPP that's happening second round right now, same thing. I'll switch over to your next question about what did the uprising following George Floyd's murder do to our work and to our entrepreneurs and to our community. And, that's a massive topic. And I'll just focus specifically on the business side of it because the trauma continues and the trauma preceded it. But that was obviously singularly traumatic. And I think it traumatized white people in a way that, Black folks and other people of color have had to live with for their entire lives and for entire generations. But just watching the video as well as watching what transpired after that brought trauma in a real way to anybody with half a heart and half a soul. Again, white people now don't have to, if they choose not to live with that, but that's not an option for people of color, and it's also hopefully not an option that will be chosen by the majority of our country as we try to get into a better place. And so, within a half a block of the Midtown Global Market, 10 buildings were burned to the ground. Al, you know that. In fact, I was trying to figure out what pile of rubble Sounds of Blackness were doing their performance in front of us. Initially thinking it was Chicago and Lake, but I don't think it was. But that rubble's still laying there. Okay, so you fast forward to today, the fact that the city hasn't been able to clear the rubble out in these low-income neighborhoods is just a travesty, frankly. And I know they're finally starting to take some steps toward that end, but we're 8 months into it. That rubble continues the trauma. It continues keeping people out of the neighborhood that, don't live there, and, traumatizing people who do live there. So that's not been the city's not getting an A for that one. In fact, they get a big F in my opinion. Besides all of that trauma and, one of the bright spots even in those horrible nights, of the arson, and we all know, but I'm going to repeat it, is that the arson was done by just a small handful of people, and everybody I heard about, and I heard their methods, and I even got pictures of them, were not from the neighborhood. And in fact, they were white, and they had an agenda, and they had been trained. And I've said that to the New York Times, and I'll say it to anybody that, the distinction between protest versus arson is a Grand Canyon of distinction. And people don't want to be real about it. That's their problem. But it wasn't the same people.
And the point is, you speak with authority about protest, because you've been part of the protest arena, and you've got personal hands-on authority in organizing and conducting principled protest. And you know the difference.
Yeah, right. And the anger is completely justified, and solutions or even honesty about it is about 500 years overdue. And we all know that. So anyway, that's kind of a little button for me. But what I wanted to say, Al, I'm sorry to get a little up to the edge here, but around the Midtown Global Market, for those 4 nights that there was no authority out on the street, and everything right around there, like literally across the street in all directions, was burning to the ground. Residents of the neighborhood, residents of the building, and tenants from the Global Market stood out there and protected the market just by their presence and what they said to people, as well as their eyeballs. So some of the tactics of the arsonists were picked up on and reported to even building security so that those fires didn't take hold. But they talked to people, and there was very little entrance into the Global Market. There was a little bit of it, but it certainly doesn't help your customer counts
Right.
To have that on top of everything else. And looking forward, like you asked me about, I don't know, man. I guess I kind of keep my head down and hope like hell that nobody gets crazy again. It's just pitiful. I mean, I think like the 99.9% of the protesters and the community that were, righteous and completely justified. Let's put it this way. I hope that they're vigilant, coming forward and recognizing how the 0.1% of the real arsonists, they many of them anyway, and deliberately targeted minority-owned businesses. That was deliberate. And the first 3-4 nights, everybody was putting up black-owned businesses on their building, to try to prevent arson.
Thank you for letting us know.
Yeah, right. By the way, I also want to give a quick shout out to Setu Jones, who is the creator of the one image that was in the Sounds of Blackness piece of George Floyd, the blue stencil, and he made that available to the general public, so it's out there everywhere. And Setu is a Frogtown, nationally renowned Frogtown artist and a close friend of mine. But you can even extend that shout out to all the artists from the community that came out to the wooden boards that everybody put up. And there's also another shout out to everybody that put up the boards and took them down, because that was a huge amount of labor that was volunteer. And Lord help us. I sure hope we don't have to do that again. But if we have to, we have to, right? These communities are nothing if not survivors, and they will persevere, and their culture and their goodness and their strength will survive. But I sure hope it doesn't have to go through that again.
So, Mike, thank you so much for this. I'm just in awe of the story that you're telling, and I thank you so much for sharing it.
Thank you.
For the sincerity, and the story you're telling also reflects a generosity of spirit and a keen awareness of human frailty and human aspiration. And I think that's what makes us decent people. I think we're at a point where you said this: people can't deny the thing that people of color, the Blacks and indigenous people, have decried for the longest. Our society has found it strategic to always ignore, to forget, selective amnesia, to claim, oh, I didn't know, when an incident revealed something horrific, an injustice, a process that uh, uh, cheated somebody out of his or her right to pursue liberty, life, and happiness. And our country would end up blaming them for not having the right attitude or the right disposition, ultimately the right skin color. That's what it really boiled down to. And structures
Absolutely.
and systems to keep them at the margin. I always complain and charge that as often as not, even in the arena of our quote unquote friends, uh, as often as not, our people get the misery and other people get the money. The other people make money on our misery, and therefore the incentive is really to manage the misery because it's a revenue stream for somebody that really isn't solving the problem, but is making money at the margin. It's like the stock market, almost making short selling, the
Right.
community. So I think we're at a different point now. I think nobody can deny, as the sound said, sick and tired of being sick and tired. Everybody sees, everybody knows, nobody can deny. They can choose to deny, but nobody's believing the denial anymore. And I think that what I'm hoping and believing is true is that a lot of ordinary people from every street and every neighborhood are standing up and acknowledging that truth telling, reconciliation, reckoning is at hand. And I'm thinking that there have to be, and you mentioned it in a word, but I'll bring you back to that. What are the opportunities that are being revealed at the center of these multiple layers of crisis within the pandemic, within the pandemic of 1492? Black people call it the pandemic of 1619, but I think for our indigenous people, friends, it's the pandemic of 1492. Uh,
Throw
and
smallpox in there, and you're not wrong whatsoever.
yeah.
Yeah.
So what is the opportunity? I think that the resiliency that we describe, that you described, exists in our community, is now presented an opportunity to surface and demonstrate. And what do you see? I mean, I see a lot of potential, a lot of good things uh, that require hard work, belief, and then just relentlessness in terms of pursuing on a plane that is fair, equitable, righteous, reasonable, and right. What do you think?
Well, I agree with all that, and the first word that comes to my mind is honesty, because whatever corner of our community or our society you want to think about on a practical level for addressing and advancing this issue, honesty, being straight up honest. Um, and I guess I'm primarily talking about on the white side of the equation, because I believe everybody else has been honest. Um, uh, that's the most critical here, and I agree that with your hope that more and more people are open to that. Um, but you know better than anybody how much work that entails, and continual work. Beyond that, I'll just throw out a few more angles on this from my reaction to your question. For the entrepreneurship that we work with, uh, we're after two huge impacts when we work with an entrepreneur. One is economic impacts like jobs and uh, paying rent and filling spaces and so on. But the other is what we call social impacts, which is being a role model to your own community, your own kids, creating community gathering places that reduce isolation, that bring the community together, create population health. Being a leader in your community, using your entrepreneurial skills, being on the board of your church or of your PTA or whoever it is, using your entrepreneurial skills. So all those things we actively cultivate and we track through Wilder research, and there's a huge amount of that. And so the more entrepreneurs, we can get assisted to come above ground and be successful and grow and own their own business and show the world that hey, you know we're on in the economy just like everybody else, and use those skills to ripple out into the community in all directions. I think that's our ultimate goal. Uh, I'm also thinking real quickly of corporate America seems to have gotten a little more honest, at least for the moment, and we all know how quick that can change. But um, there certainly seems to be a corporate response to this that feels a little bit different to me. And I'm no expert on it, but it just feels promising. And then finally, at the government level, as ugly as January 6th was, January 20th was a beautiful day and restorative to our souls to a significant extent. Especially, I was got to mention the young Gorman, the poet. Wow. If you ever have a bad day, just go back and listen to her again.
Wasn't it amazing? Yeah,
Talk
beautiful.
about hope for the future. But last week there was a set of executive orders that Joe Biden did, President Joe Biden, around the issue of dismantling structural racism. And I just caught, I mean, to me, that was, and I didn't study it real close, but I did kind of scan real quick. How do you do that, right? I mean, if you're the president of the United States and you've got all these, advisors and informants and everything else, I just kind of fascinated by, hey, this guy's actually going to give it a try. And, it had to do with housing discrimination protections that Trump had dialed back. And I don't honestly remember most, but, even strengthening CRA, right? CRA is always, Community Reinvestment Act is always under attack.
Right.
So many things are under attack under the Trump administration. But how do you move the ball even past rectifying that, set of retreats? That's happening, hopefully, in lots of different levels of society and government. And so I guess I'm hoping both at the entrepreneurial level, the corporate level, and different levels of government that the honesty and the awakening and the, trying to step back from despair at the edge of the cliff and looking down, it will continue to motivate some real change. So I'm hopeful too, Al. I'm hopeful too.
I think it's not unreasonable, Mike, for our people to start talking, just at least at an idea level, about the need to have a $1 billion investment into University Avenue. I think that I am saying that we should think in terms of how do we create a $1 billion investment for Lake Street, and how do we create a $1 billion investment for West Broadway in North Minneapolis, and use this unique set of circumstances and also the opportunity associated with the requirement that we respond bigger and better. And I praise the new administration for really pushing the need to do the $1.9 trillion investment. It may not end up there, but you lead with that for sure. And I think in that spirit, it makes sense for us to begin to articulate an expectation of what is needed in terms of money, of capital, to restore and to build back better University Avenue and Rice Street, right? The West Side, build back better Lake Street, Hennepin Lake, Bloomington Lake, the Midtown Market, and to build back better West Broadway and Plymouth Avenue and the commercial corridors in North Minneapolis. I think that that's the conversation that we need to be creating, elevating, and creating a public mind that says, yes, this is our shared vision. Let's get to work and make it so. And this is a window for that kind of thinking to take root. What do you think?
I couldn't agree more. And it's not been my nature or style, I guess, to be that bold and brave to think in those terms until recently. But I couldn't agree with you more, Al, that if not now, when? And that's part of being honest, all right? That's part of being real about it. And so even groups like ours and people like myself need to like embrace that level of advocacy. I'm going to mention two other things that come to my mind of that nature that you inspired. One is in the paper, I think yesterday or maybe today, in the St. Paul, Mayor Carter he's like a national leader on this issue of mayors for income support or whatever they call it. And so they've got like 150 families, and it's kind of like a pilot, but income support that goes just on top of whatever other supports folks are getting, and sort of trust people that they can benefit from it and put it to good use in advance. So it's a temporary thing, like 18 months. And Anthony Taylor, who's with the Cultural Wellness Center, I'll mention it. He's one of Atum Zahir's wonderful sons. He has been kind of promoting the same concept with, in one place with the Forward Minneapolis Conversations. Sean Pearson, the mayor, have been leading those. But, Anthony's been talking about the same thing. Like, how do you get income to go up around these corridors, and in addition to just what happen on the corridors themselves? And so I applaud him for thinking bigger, and yourself as well. I'm not sure I can remember my second point here, Al. So, I know it was big and bold, but yeah, I don't know if we don't. Oh, I know what the other one was reparations. Until 2 years ago, you didn't hear that in too many halls. But a year ago, it was Coates. Is that, I forget his full name, but the renowned
Nisi Coates.
Yeah, he testified in a congressional hearing about it. And you throw in the need for that honesty and conversation with the Native American community. You might be getting somewhere with honesty, because you and your listeners know way more than I do. But the wealth gap isn't an accident in this country. The education gap, the health gap, the home ownership gap, none of those are accidents. They were very deliberate. And the visible things were things like Rondo, but behind the scenes, about this, the redlining and the, who can get a job, and how are people even treated at a young age, so that what's their mindset. Anyway, I don't have to tell any of your listeners, but I don't know. That was hundreds of years of extreme, deliberate injustice that kept people back from what more broadly you call making an honest living, right? Well, if you couldn't make an honest living for all those reasons and many, many more that I haven't mentioned, then seems to me that that community owed something from what they were prevented from doing. And it wasn't like anybody was handing out money and opportunity like candy to everybody else. It's just that there were paths and there were doors, and the doors opened for some and they were shut for others. And that needs to be looked at. And that was the other big picture reaction I had to your $1 billion, billion here, a billion there, Al. Pretty soon you're talking about real money. But I like where you started this line of thinking as well, Al.
Mike, we're out of time. This has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much. Always good to talk to you. I keep learning every time I talk to you. I'm inspired by you. I thank you. I love your personal story. I just as a neighbor and a friend, I thank your mom and dad for the story that you told me about them. And it makes sense that you are who you are, because you've got people that set you on a path, to fight and to look for justice in the world, and to be committed to creating it. So, Mike Temal, my friend, thank you so very much. We'll talk to you later.
I'll tell my 98-year-old mother all that. Thank you, man. Appreciate it
All
very much.
right. Take care.